Okay, welcome to part 1 of this series. In this video, what we're going to be doing is talking about the directory structure that we're going to be using. I'm also going to explain a few little things about sort of the system as a whole, sort of as we go through. So, yeah. So I've decided not to do the database structure all at the start, which is what I usually do, because we're doing this as sort of a mini project type of thing. It makes a bit more sense to actually do the database stuff as we get to it. So when we get to the users system, creating the login type of stuff, I'll create the users table and all that, talk about all that then. And when we get to the actual private messaging stuff, I'll start creating the private message tables then. So it sort of fits all together. So that's the idea there. Anyway, in this video I'm going to explain the directory structure, and then we're going to make a start on the sort of templating system. I should also point out that I have decided not to include any of the styling stuff. I will probably mention some of it, but I'm not going to be saying, like, explaining what all the various properties do and why I've chosen those values. Because to be honest, I haven't made it look that pretty, but I will sort of point out a few things about the styling as we go through. Anyway, I suppose we may as well get started. So this is the folder that we're going to be working in. It's just called Private Message System. Obviously you can call yours whatever you like, if you're even following along. And we have this index.php, and this is the only file that the browser will actually load. So this is a PHP file, obviously, that's going to load another file sort of to use, well, sort of within it. That will make sense later on. So this sort of sets out the main layout. So if you remember back to part 0, the demonstration part, the main layout would be sort of the middle white box with the dark background and sort of the curvy corners and the shadow. That's all the main layout. That's all in one big sort of box, and then everything inside that box is actually a separate file. Okay, so that's that. And then we have this core folder, which contains all of the sort of back-end type related stuff. So you can see we have this init.inc.php file, which is the sort of same thing that I always use. And this will be included by all of the pages, and this just sort of runs any code that you want to have happen all of the time, if that makes sense. So this is actually quite a good example of trying to demonstrate this, because in my previous videos I've had sort of quite a lot of trouble trying to explain what the point of this is, because all I've done is like include another file in it or something like that. So this file is actually going to be quite a big file. It's going to be 100 or so lines, so there's a bit going on in that file. So this kind of makes a bit more sense now. So hopefully, if anything, you'll take that from this series. Anyway, that's enough about the init file. The other folders that we have in here are inc and pages. The inc folder we've met before, so I'll just go over that quickly. The inc folder contains any kind of back-end files, so you can see that we have these two here, and obviously I'll talk about these as we get to using them. But we have private message.inc.php, which is the back-end file which will define all the various functions we're going to use to do with the private messaging system. Then we also have user.inc.php, and that is the back-end sort of library file that defines all of the functions related to the sort of user login system. So yeah, that's basically that. And this is one of the things I did want to mention, and I'll probably say it again a bit later, but this is kind of the advantage of using sort of library files, you know, so having functions and not just coding everything in line, if you like, in the actual pages. Because essentially what I did to create this was copy and paste the user.inc.php from my previous tutorial, and then also I did make a few changes. I've also simplified it slightly because that's not the focus of this series. But essentially that's sort of one of the reasons why keeping your code all neat and having the sort of logic type code like functions separate from the sort of display-y type code, because you can just reuse it. So yeah, that's the idea there. Anyway, these two files are at the moment completely blank. They are defining no functions, except that one is quite big, so I'll have to blank that between parts. Anyway, so that's enough about the core folder, the inc folder. The other folder is the pages folder, and this folder contains a single file for each page. So each one of these files represents a page. That's fairly obvious. So we have an inbox, which is the list of conversations that I showed you in the previous video, and we have login, which is the login page, and that's what we're going to be creating in this video, hopefully. And we have logout, which is just another page, new conversation, and view conversation. So some of these are going to be more complicated than others. Logout, for example, is just like 2 lines of code, so there's not much complicated there, but that will be included as part of the user system. as will the sort of functionality of the login page. In this part, all we're going to do is sort of put a form there. So yeah. The new conversation, for example, is also one of the more complicated ones that has quite a lot of sort of form validation and all that kind of stuff going on. Right, so that's enough about pages. Let's go back to our root and talk about this other folder, which is called ext. So this ext folder, which is short for extension, I don't know why I picked that, but it is. So this is going to include sort of anything that is used sort of publicly. So the core stuff is kind of hidden back-end PHP things, basically. And this ext folder is things a bit more like, well, CSS, JavaScript, that sort of thing. Things that the browser uses, essentially. The user's browser, obviously, not, well, I don't know what else. So anyway, inside here, for this video, we've got a CSS folder. Normally I'd have like some other folders for JavaScript and one for images. Obviously we're not using JavaScript or images, so I've just got CSS. And in here, the main.css file is, well, that's this. I will actually just open that up, because I think I've forgotten to open it. So let's just open that up. So like I said, I'm not going to be explaining all of this CSS, because there's quite a lot of it. And to be honest, most of it is fairly simple. However, when we get to something where I'm going to use a class or something like that, I'll just show you what these styles are, and maybe go over them a little bit. So I'm not going to be coding these out. These are all going to be left in the file as they are now. Anyway, we won't worry too much about that. So I suppose we may as well get started. So the first thing we need to do is go to our index.php file and just have it include this init.php, the init file. So this one here. So all we need to do for this is just add a line at the top here, which is include. Oh, actually, I also should have mentioned that this index.php is starting off with a very simple sort of HTML template. So I've just given it a title. I've included the main.css file here, which I just showed you up here. And then we've also got this div created with the ID of wrap. So this corresponds to the, well, it doesn't correspond really. It's given some styles, if you like, in the main.css. So if we just scroll down, you see we have here wrap. So we're just giving it a margin, 100 pixels from the top and bottom, auto to center it, giving it some padding to make it look a bit better. Padding just moves the content inwards, so it's sort of margin but inside. Width we just set to 800, giving it a color, giving it a border. Here we've set the border radius, which is the sort of curvature of the corners, and then we've given it a shadow just to make it look a bit sort of nicer. So like I said, I'm not going to be explaining these in too much detail, but I will sort of point out what's going on, so that when I load the page up, it doesn't look like I've just sort of invented, or it looks like you expect, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Anyway, so up here, what we were doing was including our init file, so let's just do that, or finish doing that. So it's in the core folder, and then it's called init.inc.php. So then what we need to do is code some code to decide which file needs to be included. So the way this is going to work is there's going to be a get variable in the URL. So for example, if you just go to our page here, you can see we've got index.php, and then we're setting page, just get rid of that download, and we're setting page here equal to inbox. So what this means is that, well, we're telling the server that we want to use we want to show the inbox page using the template, which is sort of included in index.php. So we're going to use this get variable to decide on which file to include. So essentially, if we just go back to our core folder and into the pages folder, so we're on the inbox page, so we want to include this inbox.page.inc.php, which is currently empty. We want to include it in our page here. Sort of everything that's in this page file is going to go between these div tags inside this div element, and that is the sort of white bit in the middle of the page. Okay, so that is pretty much that. So what we need to do is go to our init file and code something to decide on which file needs to be included. Okay, so let's go across to the init file, and right at the very top we're going to do a few checks first. So we're going to make sure that the user has actually specified a page, because obviously if we just browse to just index.php, which would be the default usually anyway, we're going to get sort of some errors most likely, or some sort of useless page that isn't really a page. It'll just be like a little tiny, well, it'll be the sort of wrapping element the white box without any content, so it'll look a bit odd. So what we need to do is make sure the user has specified a page, and the way we can do that is by doing if empty get page. And this will just check to make sure that, well, it'll check two things. It'll make sure that the variable get page actually exists and has a value that isn't considered empty. It'll also check, well, it'll check to make sure it isn't considered empty, and things that are considered empty are an empty string, which, well, empty string 0, the numeric value 0, the string value 0, I believe, and null, and some other things. You can look it up on php.net. There's a whole load of them. So yeah. So by doing that, we're doing sort of a very basic validation on the page. Now we don't want to just go straight ahead and use this to decide which file we're including, i.e. we don't want to just go straight ahead and do include get page, because this opens up a pretty significant security issue, because obviously if you give the user control over which file they're including, they can sort of include their own code and sort of basically do anything they want at all to your site. So that's something we're going to try and protect against. So the way we're going to do that is make sure that the file that they specify actually exists in the folder. And we're also going to make sure that we don't do that using the file exists function, because that can sort of also be tricked in a way to include a file that you don't want it to. If you do use file exists, you can basically trick the site into including any files on the server, because those files do exist. So file exist isn't a sort of suitable check here anyway. It is in some cases. So what we're going to do is list all of the pages using the scan dir function, and then we're going to check to see if get page is one of those in that list. So the way we're going to do this, I'll just delete this for now, is we're going to use the scan dir function, and what this function does is it takes a path, so a folder, as its parameter, and it returns a list of files within that folder. So the path we want to scan is in the core folder, and now it's called pages. Now at the moment we don't really know where we are in the sort of directory. We know this file init.inc.php is in the core folder, however it may not always be included from the folder above. So when you include a file, so for example if I just go back here to the actual root, we're currently looking at in the browser index.php. So when we include the core folder, we are still sort of technically in this folder. The more sort of correct way to say is that the private message system folder is still our working directory. So when you try and include a file or list a directory, you need to use the core folder. So to make this actually work, what we would need to do is use scandir core / pages. However, we don't, like I said, we don't always know that we're going to be in that folder. So one thing we can do is get the full server path to the current folder, which we can do by doing dir name of the file constant, like so. So this file constant, it contains the full server path to the current file you actually type this in. So it sort of ignores if the file is being included, if you like. And this is 2 underscores, just by the way. It's quite a common problem on the forum that people just type 1. It looks fairly similar, but that's 2. That's 1, that's 2. Okay. And then this dir name function just sort of chops off the file name portion. So essentially this just leaves you with the path to the core folder. So this is actually what's shown up here. If you just look, got web, and then this path will be the result of this dir name function. So we're going to store this in a variable called core path. So it's the, oh dear, I've done that completely wrong. Core path, because it's the path to the core folder. Fairly simple. So now we can use this in our scan dir function. So we can do core path like so. Oh dear. Wow, okay. Don't know how I managed to get that wrong, but oh well. No harm done. Okay, there we go. So then if we scan the core path / pages, wow, okay, I really can't type, this is terrible. We should get a list of the page files. So if I just print this out to show you how it works, like so, and reload our browser, like so, well, it's kind of hard to see. So if I just view the page source and bring it down here, you can see that this is the result of the print_r. and well, you can see that we have this list of pages. These two things up here don't really matter. The single dot, if you're interested, represents the current folder, so this represents the actual pages folder, and this double dot represents the folder above, so that would be the core folder, I guess. So anyway, all we need to do now is check to make sure that this get variable page is one of these pages. So all we're going to do is append .page.inc.php to it, and then check to see if it's in this array. Okay, so I'll just close the page source and we'll go back to our code. So what I'm going to do is remove this print underscore r. I'm going to replace it with an if statement. So just remember that this scandir returns the array. So now we can just do if in array some string, which we're going to check to see if it's in the array, and then we can pass the scandir parameter as the second parameter, so the in array function, because it returns an array. And we're going to check to see if that's false. And if it is false, that means that the page they've specified is wrong. Okay. And we also need the empty check. So if the page they've specified is an empty string, or they haven't given a value, we also want to run this block, which is going to be show a 404 page, or just redirect them somewhere. Okay, so I'll just add the empty check in here. So empty get page or. Okay, and the reason we're doing or is because we want to run this block if the page isn't specified or it's an empty string, or we want to run it if they've specified an invalid page. So the final thing to do is to put the name of the file in here. So this is just get page dot page.inc.php. Okay, so that's that done. So now, just for the sake of testing, I'm just going to add an echo in here to say invalid page, and then we can go back to our code, our browser, and reload this. And you can see we don't have any output up here. It might be a little bit hard to see, especially on YouTube, but there's nothing here because this file inbox.page.inc.php does exist. And if I just change this to say inbox 7, you can see we get invalid page. So that's pretty much that. So I'm going to end this here because it's gone on for quite a lot too long. So thanks for watching, and come back for part 2 where we'll carry on with this template system.